Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin. And joining me today is a good friend of mine, Rob Akers of Acres of Strength, which is, I think, one of the best names ever for, any sort of fitness or strength-oriented business. I mean, talk about a very good use of your last name in your business. I couldn't do I couldn't do anything similar with mine, unfortunately, but Rob is a very interesting guy. He has a long and storied history in the world of physical culture that has culminated in some very cool accomplishments, particularly as of recently. And as his name of his business implies, he also owns a gym, very smart personal trainer. And for those of you who did my Bodyweight Mastery, the very first iteration of it, you would remember Rob because he was the model for the moves. I had him knocking out all of the hard stuff. So he is a man of many talents, not just with the kettlebell or the barbell, but he's a real stud with bodyweight as well. So we're going to kick things off momentarily. But as always, I always like to begin each podcast with a reminder that if you have not yet, you should get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It is designed to be done in conjunction with whatever else you're currently doing. So it's not going to interrupt your training. It's going to help to make it stronger. It's going to improve your stamina, your coordination, your strength. All sorts of good stuff. I've gotten a lot of really nice compliments from people on it. So go to 9minutechallenge.com. That's the number 9 and then minutechallenge.com. If you can't spell those two things, I really don't want you doing the program anyway, so I'm not going to spell those out. 9minutechallenge.com, and you can get your free copy. So without further ado, Rob, thank you for joining me.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
I remember actually, this was shortly before I left undisclosed location, Pennsylvania, in 2019, also known as Downingtown, by the way. I lived in a small town called Downingtown, or as I like to call it, Uppingville. I thought it just had like a much more upbeat sound to it. I think you and I, we met up one last time before I headed out on my journey back to Nebraska. And I was like, I'd love to have you on the Hammercast sometime. And you're like, oh, I don't know. I've never been on a podcast or whatever. And I was like, no, it'd be a lot of fun. And here we are 3 years later. We finally made it happen.
Finally.
Yes, after goading every single day for 3 years, he finally said yes. I'm kidding, obviously.
Finally caught me, so I couldn't say no.
Correct. Yeah, you and I met, I think, for the first time. This would have been on a trip of mine to Pennsylvania. Yeah, you might remember better than I do. I think it was the Bells and Beer in 2014, was it? Or was it Killing It with Kettlebells?
No. So this would have been a little earlier. I think that might have been one of the very first, or maybe the second, Killing It with Kettlebells workshop that Pat and Sam put on.
Yeah.
Where they introduced you as the original strength expert of the group, and you took an entire day there. That's where we first met.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember that actually, because I remember you and I were reminiscing about that once a while ago, and I had forgotten about this, but you mentioned that I think you were going to do, I don't know how familiar, I think you were pretty familiar with kettlebells at the time, but we were doing something, and I think it was just maybe even just a kettlebell deadlift, which for you is nothing because you got like a massive deadlift, but I think you had like your low back was curved or something like that, and I was like, "What? Tell me about that." I'm forgetting.
It was that was in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that because I was at that seminar, specifically asking when we did the business side of things, how I could get myself into a facility in some sort of sublease situation because I was broke and I couldn't open up my own place.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were just doing all the fundamentals of RKC/SFG style kettlebells, the deadlift section of it. And you came over and you were just like, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but your low back is just a little bit rounded on these deadlifts. And I was like, oh, I didn't really realize that. So you were like, here, try this. So you had me kneel down and showed me how to do a pretty good hip flexor stretch. And I was like, oh my God, like I was so freaking tight, and got right back up, felt better than ever. And that was before you actually had given your presentation. So that's how we met. And then the following day, you did your original strength workshop, and that's how it all began.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny to think too, like some of the people who are at that early workshop, how much I've kept in touch with them. There's John Bear, a
Yeah.
few others along the way. Yeah, it was a magical time, yeah, in many respects. But that wasn't your first foray into the world of physical training. I mean, you've been at it for a long time. Like, how did you get into, we'll say strength will be somewhere along the continuum. But how did you get into training in general, physical fitness, sport, that sort of thing? Like, was this something you did later in life? Was it something you did when you were younger? How did that
Yeah.
begin? What was the origin?
Well, so I grew up in Downingtown, which is the part of Downingtown that I grew up in had a lot of woods behind it. I had a family that of a lot of outdoors and outdoor sports type people, so a lot of hunting, a lot of fishing, and stuff like that. So, and I was also raised by parents that didn't let me back in the house until it was dark.
Right.
So,
The good old
so
days.
yeah, exactly. So always outside, always doing things. My father was a really good soccer player back in college, so he got me involved in soccer really early on. I didn't really like it all that much because I was extremely ADD and just like couldn't really focus on the whole team sport type thing. So they were like, "All right, you don't have to do soccer, but you got to do something." My mother, 100% Japanese, always kept me very connected to that culture and everything. My grandmother, who also lived with us, had lived in Japan for a very long time. So around the house, you just had all sorts of pictures of old samurai warriors and stuff like that. And so naturally, The Karate Kid was a movie that was always playing in my house. So my parents were like, what would you like to do? Like, if you don't want to do soccer, you got to do something. And I was like, oh, can I do karate? So my mom, of course, is like, yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
That's how I ended up over at Dragon Gym in Exton, where you and I met. I started there in Taekwondo, not karate, uh, as a kindergartner, and I did that for about 2 years, and then I got involved in wrestling. So that would have been fourth grade. Stuck with wrestling for a little bit, decided that I was going to go play some basketball. And then I realized I wasn't going to get very tall. So middle school comes around. It was pretty much wrestling from there, all out through high school.
Very cool.
So that would be and through wrestling would be how I for the first time got exposed to a weight room, because Downingtown is located in Chester County, Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful county. The public schools there are really good, and Downingtown has a really, really good weight room. So I was very lucky to have all those tools at my disposal. So being on a varsity sport, you're in the weight room all the time.
Yeah.
So that's how it's.
That's very cool. Now, I remember actually you and I went to Downingtown High School once because I think you were coaching somebody at a wrestling tournament. And
I was a coach at Downingtown West High School.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, for 5 years.
Yeah, no, that was fun. It's interesting too, because like basically after I left my own high school as a youngster, like I just never stepped foot in the high school again. So it was an interesting situation to be like on the other end of it, where you're no longer a student, but you're old enough really to be a teacher. And walking through the halls, you can see like the excitement around the sports, and you can see all these amazing athletes. And I remember there were some dudes there in particular, I remember, who were like really formidable. I wouldn't know any of their names, but I remember watching a few of them wrestle, because I think I was up in the bleachers with you at the beginning, and then you're like, okay, now I got to go down and I got to coach, this athlete. And I went down there later, and there were a couple. They didn't even look like they were high schoolers, to be honest. They were just huge dudes, like throwing each other all over the place. And I was like, man, like these guys are some scary good athletes.
Yeah, well, you were at a freestyle wrestling tournament, so that would have been, if I'm remembering correctly, that would have been the spring of maybe 2018.
It was either 2018 or 2019. I don't remember exactly, but it was somewhere around then. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm remembering the team that I was coaching back then. That was a freestyle tournament, and you had gone because you were interested in learning some throws and stuff like that. And I was like, well, then you want to come to this tournament.
Yeah, that may have been 2019 then, because now that I think about it, I know, folks, if you scroll down on my Instagram feed, you will see some videos of Rob and me training, and I obviously, I wish I could say I kept up with the stuff that you've taught me, but it's like, it's not easy to find, because I find wrestling very interesting, actually. I think jujitsu is cool for sure, but I feel like, wrestling is really like a skill all on its own that is super valuable, but it's not easy to find like adult wrestling teams
That is
because it's
true.
mostly viewed as like a kid's sport, which I think is very weird because, you see guys like, I mean, if you watch any of the like wrestling tournament, I don't mean like pro wrestling, but I mean like collegiate or freestyle wrestling. Like I would watch the videos of Kerry Colat, for example, just like hurling people around like nobody's business. And that's like, man, I can't imagine not wanting to do something like this. So it is difficult to find that, but it was great doing a couple of lessons. I remember in particular, it was like you have to be in really good shape to do it, because even just like the stuff you'd have me do, where I'm kind of walking around in the wrestling position, just doing this for a couple minutes on end. It's like it really jacks up the heart rate. So when you were training in wrestling, like apart from lifting weights, which I know now is very common, my understanding is that wrestlers in the olden days just did a lot of high rep body weight stuff. But like, what were some of the things that you would do to keep in shape prior to discovering kettlebells?
Well, you wrestle pretty much. All the conditioning is found very much in the sport, very similar to almost every other martial art, especially jujitsu. You get on the mat and you roll a lot. So what a basic wrestling practice would look like is, you get some sort of dynamic warm up going on. You have a lot of kids running around the mats. You start doing a lot of forward rolls, backward rolls, cartwheels, handsprings, handstand walks across the mat, lots of push-ups, lots of squats, and then you would start drilling. So just to kind of reiterate the stuff that we were working on, you get in your wrestling stance, which basically, for anybody that doesn't know what that looks like, it looks like universal athletic stance. You would start doing some hand fighting, and it's just drill, drill, drill. That's where you would get a lot of the cardiovascular side of the equation, and really there's no other way to build that kind of conditioning except for doing that.
Yeah.
There are definitely some things that can help. Obviously strength and conditioning has its part in the equation of preparing a wrestler, but you really got to get on the mat, you got to drill all the time, and you got to just be in competition year round.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine then that doing all of that plus lifting weights, you were probably in pretty darn good shape.
I'll tell you what, back in high school, I was not a very good lifter. That was the thing. We had a really great weight room, and we had a pretty decent program. But the thing about when you're coaching high school sports is that your time in the weight room is very limited, and you're dealing with a very diverse population of people. You're dealing with some people that might know the ins and outs of what you're teaching them. You're also with some kids that are just turning 14 years old. Some of them haven't hit puberty yet, so they don't have a lot of that biological strength yet. Some of them have sprung up 5 inches in one summer, so they're kind of gangly. So you got to keep things very, very simple, and you got to keep it concise and quick. And you got to get in and get out. So I learned a few basic lifts, but none of them were very strong. But before Hurricane Ida destroyed everything in my basement, I had a file of some of my old workouts from back from high school, the old lifts we used to do and stuff like that. And my numbers were garbage. So the weight room was never my strong suit. It wasn't until later on, when I was in college, that I found myself back into a gym again, which was Dragon Gym, and then I had someone really teach me, and that's when I really fell in love with lifting and strength training and everything, because I had never been good at it before. But now I was really beginning to understand it and how to leverage things. So strength training definitely came later on. It was something that I did when I was younger, but I was never very good at it back then.
Right. Now, who was your instructor when you went to Dragon Gym? Because I know that there have been many great instructors who have gone through those halls. And was this around the same time you were taking up bare-knuckle boxing with Brian Petty?
Yeah. So let's see. That that time period would have been 2009 through 2011. And in that time, the Dragon Door and the Russian Kettlebell Challenge was beginning to make its rise in the United States. And in Chester County, there were two people that had certified very early on for those original Russian Kettlebell Challenges. Randy, I can't remember his last name, was one of them. Yeah, there it is. And Brian Petty was the other. Brian Petty, he met our mutual friends Sam Sikdar and Lonnie, I believe, at Old School Fitness, which was in Chester. So they were training there because I'm not sure they had all the equipment, but they definitely didn't have anywhere near the amount of equipment in Dragon Gym they do now. But back then, I think that they were doing their training elsewhere. That's where they met him. He was one of the only people in the area that was teaching kettlebells at the time. So they brought him in. I was going to school at Westchester University at the time. I was studying music, and I just very much missed that, honestly, that wrestling aspect of my life, being part of a team, having something to physically compete at, and having somewhere to train. So with the wrestling background and having a little background in boxing, I wanted to go somewhere and see if I could get involved in some mixed martial arts. Brian Petty was the guy who was teaching that at that time. So got into Dragon Gym, started working with him. Now, kettlebells was always part of the training program, and he was using the Russian kettlebell swing, the snatch, and pretty much all of those big power moves of that paradigm to teach people who are a little younger than me, my age, and a little older than me how to strike correctly, how to produce force from the ground through the hips and then letting it go out through the hand and the feet. Really, really effective method of teaching people how to strike. But that's how we met. If I'm remembering correctly, he and I officially started working together in January of 2010.
And he was a tough instructor, as I understand.
Brian was a psychopath, and I honestly have not worked with anybody like him since. He was definitely something. Man. And it's funny because as we're having this conversation, I'm just remembering all the other stuff that, like, I lost in that stupid water. But there was a couple training programs that he had written, and I just remember like looking back on those, and it's just like, okay, go outside, take shirt off. It's February.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? How old am I at that time? I guess I would have been in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And it's, okay, great. I'm outside, shirts off, dump bucket of cold water on your head. Okay, run for 15 minutes. Inside, run for 15 minutes. Now, plank, plank with knuckles on top of cement. Now, hit bag of gravel for 2 minutes. So yeah, so Brian was a bare knuckle boxer, so he was all about body hardening. So we would do ungodly long knuckle planks on pavement, hit concrete with the inside of your hand, and yeah, he did train people that were interested in actually getting inside of a ring and getting inside of a cage and stuff like that. But also Brian was very, very much about teaching people how to handle themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like he was more training for people who wanted to get in a cage in a situation like in the movie Bloodsport, as opposed to just like, like the octagon or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. My understanding was that he competed in bare knuckle boxing. Did he bounce too? Was he also a bouncer?
That's what he did primarily. He was a professional bouncer in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Which sounds as tough as I'm sure it is, because Philly, I don't know how many people have been there, but Philly has plenty of rough areas and plenty of rough and tumble people as well.
Yeah. And he always came home every week with some sort of story, so we would always just be we'd be warming up, and the warm up was the same thing every day. And if he walked in and we weren't already at it, he'd just be like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" So, and we'd all just be sitting around like, "Oh, I wonder how Brian's weekend was. Like, I wonder what happened this time." And he always had something good for us.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. He's really a legendary figure. In fact, for those of you who have the book, if you look in the book Easy Strength by Pavel and Dan John, Brian Petty is featured on one of the pages. I don't remember where, but look at the back. You'll find his name. And true to form, as Rob is saying, there's the picture of him is with a kettlebell overhead, shirtless, wearing gloves in like a snowstorm. So,
Yep.
Yeah, and no hat too, because
He was bald.
yeah, pneumonia didn't dare, to try to mess with this dude. So you got quite an education in martial arts. You wrestled in high school. You did some bare knuckle boxing with for all intents and purposes, a very, very serious cat. You did taekwondo at the world famous Dragon Gym. And then eventually you fell in love with lifting, in large part thanks to what you learned from Brian. And so was the kettlebell your first love, or was it barbells and dumbbells? How did you get into it?
Definitely kettlebells first. Kettlebells we spent a lot of time with, and so there was like the MMA side of things. Two little amateur fights with Brian against some people who were boxers that were just trying to make that transition over into MMA. Having the wrestling background, I won both of those fights pretty easily.
Nice.
But so through things like the kettlebell swing and the kettlebell snatch, and then rack holds and cleans and everything like that, I learned how to strike pretty well with him. And then I just became a little bit curious. I was like, "So Brian, like, how does one become a Russian kettlebell instructor?" And so he explained it to me, and at the time, it was something that I was just like, maybe I'll do that one day. That sounds kind of cool. But right now, I'm really into martial arts, and I'm still in school, and all of that. Years later, unfortunately, Brian did fall ill, and he ended up passing away. Mm-hmm. And that kind of dislocated a lot of us. But obviously, it was devastating for that community and everyone that knew him.
Yeah.
And all of us that were part of that original little fight team in Dragon Gym sort of all dispersed after that happened. I ended up sticking around, and I didn't really know what else to do with myself there. So I continued playing around with some of the kettlebell techniques that he had taught. Meanwhile, there was another guy there, mutual friend of ours, Pat Flynn, who was preparing. I think that he was either preparing for his RKC, or he had already become an RKC, and he was beginning to build his platform, Chronicles of Strength. So I began to train with him, and then I was like, "Hey, Pat, I would like to do this. How can I get on that path?" So Pat and Sam kind of took me the rest of the way in terms of preparation. I just decided one day at 3 a.m. when I got home from work, because I used to work at a local bar, I was like, "You know what? I'm going to do it." So this would have been May of 2012 that I signed up for the RKC in Philadelphia, and I spent the rest of the summer preparing for it. And then I certified in September, and that whole preparation was where not only did I really fall in love with kettlebell training at the time, but where I fell in love with training in general. Because signing up for the actual certification itself in order to pass those strength tests and to pass the RKC style snatch test at the time, that really set a pretty high standard of failure for me, because now I actually was like, okay, I have something coming up in a few months, and I'm going to feel real stupid if I show up to it completely unprepared. So for the first time, really since high school, since preparing for those big postseason matches where you get to like the state tournament, try to get yourself on the podium, or even preparing for those little MMA fights that I had, this was the first big thing that I had trained for, and it just felt really good to have a goal and to show back up in the gym with a purpose. And yeah, it was something. It was amazing.
Yeah, it really is an interesting feeling, I think, when you have a certification that you have to prepare for. Because I had to, as of the time of this recording, a few months prior, I was finishing up my SFG2 recertification requirements. And yeah, it's like, it becomes an all-encompassing thing. And then you also have to figure out, especially when it's something that where you have to train for something at a high level. As time goes on, you have to kind of drop things out. So anything that doesn't add to what you need to accomplish has to go by the wayside. And I think that it is a very different approach than how people should train in general. But I think that it is very illuminating because you start to see just how important it is to like veer your life toward, or your training at the very least, toward that like one specific thing. And then of course, like you said, you think like, well, I'm going to feel really stupid if I'm not going all in and I show up unprepared and what have you. But
incentive structures are very, very strong.
Yes.
When you sign up for something, you put down the money, you've made this announcement that you're doing it, and you have everyone around you asking, how's that going? How you doing? And, it's just different. It makes you, and there's also that adventure and quest-like feeling of it. Like, okay, every day it creeps closer. And then you get a week out from it and you're just like, oh, here it comes. It's nothing like it.
It's electric. It really is. And then you finish it and you're like, oh my gosh, it feels like, weight off your shoulders and all that other stuff. But you've taken on, more recently, you've taken on another challenge, and that's powerlifting. And my understanding is you're doing quite well. So how did you get into powerlifting and making the transition into not just doing it for fun, but also for competition?
Oh, let's see. I guess I got bored. I got myself established in Chadds Ford, which is about 45 minutes away from where I grew up in the southern part of Chester County. I started off teaching just kettlebell classes, and the population that I was serving here were mostly adults in their mid 40s. that were in those classes. I was subleasing from a yoga studio, and at the same time, I don't know what it was exactly that made me wanted to coach wrestling. I don't know. I think maybe the motivation at the time was I wanted some experience teaching large groups, and I knew that if I got with a high school sports team, I'd have at least like between 30 to 40 kids that I would have to program for. Mm-hmm. So at the time, one of my old assistant coaches from he asked me if I would come out and help him out. And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And it was kind of a win-win situation for both of us. He needed a strength coach and I needed some experience. And I didn't think that I was going to stay with the high school coaching very long, but naturally there are a couple freshmen that I really enjoyed working with in the following year. I just wanted to see how they would do. So I ended up coaching there 5 years. So inside that gym, in my own practice, all I really had was kettlebells. But in the Downingtown West gym, I had access to everything. I had barbells, plates, dumbbells, everything. So I came to a point where I was like, you know what? Why don't I just actually make high school kids the focus of what I'm doing out in Chadds Ford? And so that's how we ended up having mostly high school kids in this gym. After that got established, and after I got my feet on the ground with the business, the same thing sort of happened with the that had happened with the RKC prep. I was like, well, I'm bored. I want to learn something new. I want some new kind of a challenge to, and that right there is the way that I have learned best to get into some sort of activity, to ask for help from somebody who has done it before, to have a coach of some sort, and then just do the thing and see how I do. I had been doing just a little bit of deadlifting and squatting on my own because now I had that sort of equipment inside my gym. And I just began to look around at some of the numbers at the local level. One of our other mutual friends, Alyssa Di Natale, she had competed in a couple of powerlifting competitions, and she told me where to look. And I looked up some of the numbers on deadlift in particular, and I was like, huh, well, at my weight class, I think that I could do pretty well in something like that, but I don't know how to get involved with it. So our other mutual friend, Eric DeWong, who is still my coach and really, really cool guy. He and I met, and well, so funny thing about Eric is, you know what Eric looks like.
Of course, yeah.
Gargantuan beast of an Asian man.
Yeah, he's a tremendous man.
So this guy, it was really funny because when I first saw him, I was like, you look kind of familiar, but whatever. And I saw him go over on the mats and he just started breakdancing. And it hit me. Years ago, when I was a freshman in high school, they had this assembly for don't use drugs, kids.
Yeah.
And now type sort of thing. And there was this really skinny Asian kid that came out, and he was just like, I don't do that because I can break dance like this. And he just went out there and burned the house down. It was freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, are you that guy? And Eric is like about 200 pounds bigger than he used to be. And that's why I didn't recognize him. But he was like, yeah, that was me. So anyhow, I was like, hey, Eric, I would like to powerlift. How do I get started? And I'm not necessarily interested in maybe doing the entire competition. For those that don't know that sport, it's 3 lifts. You have the bench press, the squat, and the deadlift. And if you're doing a full power competition, you get 3 attempts on each lift, and the totals of all of those lifts will be tallied up at the end, and that will dictate who wins in each weight class. I was only interested in the deadlift because those were the only numbers that I looked at. So Eric was like, okay, what let's take your weight. What's your weight class? And at the time I weighed about 120 pounds. So he's like, okay, you'll compete at 123. Let's see what the numbers are. And he was just like, oh, come on. We're going to do all 3 of these. I'm not going to let you go into this and just do the deadlift. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So that preparation began, and I will say the first training session that I had with him was probably one of the most difficult sessions I had in my life.
I believe it.
Absolutely. I know that because you have trained with him before, but it was shocking, absolutely shocking of how my body was just not used to that level of volume. And I was also shocked at how much volume it truly takes to get yourself stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So after that first week of preparation, and it was just 3 workouts a week at the time, I was like, geez, I don't know. Let it go for another week, started to adapt to it. And then the numbers just started to fly through the air, and I immediately became addicted to the process. So that would have been 2000. Say July 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Competed at a state championship powerlifting meet, broke all the state records in that. And for me at the time, it was just a one-time thing. But after that first competition, I could not wait to prepare for the next one. So I got.
And Eric is very good at preparing people because he has a mind for doing things in a way that is not just according to, well, here's what everyone's doing nowadays. He has a background, like you pointed out, in breakdancing, but also he was a competitive bodybuilder. And so he's big on, a lot of the bodybuilding movements that people in the strength world, for whatever reason, like to poo-poo. He's big on assistance with.
A certain sector of the strength world do, for sure.
But I mean, he's produced some really great lifters. I know there's like Misho, for example. I'm always just blown away whenever I see his videos because he's just I think Misho is only like 180, 185 pounds. He looks like he's 225 pounds of solid muscle because he's just so jacked.
L looks like he's ready to go out on show. Yeah,
Yeah.
Michel, he's one of the most fun people to be in the gym with.
Yeah.
You
And
walk
just
him
unreal.
and feeling like totally like lethargic. You're like, oh, I don't feel like it. As soon as Michel starts lifting, you're like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got an energy about him. I've been in the gym a few times when he was there lifting, and it was incredible. And I did do a couple of sessions with Eric as well because I was very interested in, I find barbell training interesting. It's still not like my main go-to, but I think it has a lot of utility. I'm of the mind that I think it's if you want to pursue it, it's better that you be good at at dumbbells, yes, but body weight and kettlebells beforehand. And I know that I think one of the things that was great about your forays into it is that you did plenty of body weight training as a wrestler, and then and then later on as well, and then you got into kettlebell training. So it's like the transition into barbell training seems like it's been relatively straightforward for you. Like you first time out, you break all the state records, which is pretty awesome. And I know Dan John has talked about one of his belief is that one of the reasons that a lot of people who were high school wrestlers and they later get into powerlifting, one of the reasons they do so well, for example, in the bench press, is the example he gives, is that because they do just so many push-ups that it's just like burns this movement pattern into their system. And then, additionally, you've also got the benefits that you get from not just the movement pattern training, but also the tendon and ligament training that really helps you to put up some massive poundages. And I think that, you add on to that, like some, high rep kettlebell quick lifts. It makes your deadlifts a lot easier, squats to a certain degree. That's certainly the case. And I think you're well on your way to another competition coming up pretty soon here. Is that correct?
In July, it's going to be a bodybuilding competition.
Oh, very nice. Well, I mean, it makes perfect sense, dude. I saw that picture of you, the one that I sarcastically commented on. It was a picture of Rob. I mean, looking like completely jacked. Like we're talking like Bruce Lee jacked. And I wrote something. I think I responded to it like, it's like looking in a less jacked mirror. But that's not true, actually. It's like looking in a more jacked mirror.
It's a very Alex joke.
Exactly. I felt like it wouldn't be me if I didn't poke fun at you. But no, I think you're going to crush it because you look phenomenal. I mean, truly. And even before you were training for the bodybuilding competition, you always had like a really Bruce Lee-esque physique. And I can tell you've built on it since the last time I saw you because you're definitely looking even more muscular. Yeah, you're looking jacked, my man.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, it's I will say the bodybuilding workouts are that preparation is much more fun than the powerlifting preparation. The diet, on the other hand, oh my God. So I at this point I have put on about 20 pounds in a month. Mm-hmm. At first the competition, which is OCB, Organization of Competitive Bodybuilders, it's going to take place in now Allentown, Pennsylvania in July. Originally, we had wanted to do one in May. And Eric was like, hey, man, like, it's going to be a great experience. Like, regardless of what happens in May, it's going to be great just to do the training, get yourself on stage, see how it goes. And this is the reason why I wanted to do it, because I, again, just wanted to get myself involved in something new, truly learn the ins and outs of this kind of training. I learn things best by just going ahead and doing it and mapping things out as it happens. Mm-hmm. But I will say, about 2 weeks into this preparation, May was seeming like it was like next week, because I was like, I'm not sure that I'm going to be ready for this. Yeah, I'm going to do it, but I don't know how this is going to go, because the eating was just something that I had never had to do before. The first thing we were doing is just taking tabs on grams of protein. Yeah. Plus eating in a calorie deficit. No, I'm sorry, a calorie surplus. Yeah. Now, a calorie surplus, what I used to think, was not a calorie surplus.
It was just barely over the brim.
Oh my gosh. So he sent me a message just being like, okay, look, just give me a general overview of what you're doing. And I sent it to him being like, okay, here's what I'm doing. And he just says, "Oh my gosh, you're eating like nothing at all." And I'm like, I'm about to cry, man.
Yeah.
I was struggling with this from the outset. And he said, "I would eat that in one meal."
He's not kidding, by the way. If you follow
No,
Eric, you follow. I mean, I love following him because I see the stuff that he posts now, and I'm like, I didn't even know this type of food existed. Like, he's like, and he's firing it all down his gullet. He's incredible. He can put it away.
like nothing. So, and the reason why I was struggling was because I was eating these big meals and I didn't get a good night of sleep for about 2.5 weeks because I'm just tossing and turning all night long. What I discovered that I had to do, and this is just me, but the only way that I could get the amount that I really needed to stimulate the kind of muscular gain and to puff up the way that I needed to, is that from dawn to dusk, I just needed to be constantly eating.
Yeah.
But not have any regular sit down meal times anymore because they made me feel so ungodly full and just totally horrible. It just had to be constant. And after that, I began to feel better. I was recovering from the training better. I was sleeping better. The size was coming on a little bit better. But that was one thing that I never would have learned without putting myself through this training.
Yeah.
You know,
people don't realize that bodybuilding, the eating is not just, strict. It's difficult.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
It is unbelievably difficult.
But it's these little things that when you do things like sign yourself up for in the hypothetical, a powerlifting competition, Olympic weightlifting, bodybuilding, or even something more endurance based like a half marathon or Spartan race, mud race. The reason why those things are so good for the development of coaches and people in general is that you learn these things. And there are things that just won't have the kind of value of reading an article about it, until you actually go through the preparation and you're just like, oh my, and you had that story to go along with it. Like, oh my God, I'm miserable and this and that. So this preparation again, and that's just one little tidbit there because we're still in the phase of just getting a little bit bigger, and probably in May we'll start the cutting phase. So
nice.
Be continued on that discussion. We'll see how that goes.
Good. Well, it's got me fired up. It makes me feel like I want to do this now. Not, just so that I can remain more jacked than you. Not at all. That's not the. I'm kidding. No, I remember Eric having talked about this. I think he's talked about doing like distance coaching for stuff like this in the past. And he's a man who knows how to create results. I mean, he's done great work with you with powerlifting. I mean, I see your videos and I'm like, just a massive improvement. And you were very impressive strength-wise before. Like I said, that's why I had you do the modeling for the original Bodyweight Mastery program.
Still have all of
it. That's great, man. I'm very happy to hear that. It's since taken on a few new iterations, but yeah, like it was an easy choice to pick it because it's like you could do all this stuff, incredible movability, very, very good strength, and you're just always expanding, always growing, and passing that along to your very lucky students as well. And on that note, I would love to know, where can people follow you? And I do encourage that people follow you. Where can they follow you online, social media, website, all that stuff?
Sure. So people can follow us online at www.akersofstrength.com. And on social media, Instagram, AkersOfStrength_TS.
Now, I would like to point out that his name is not spelled Akers, A-C-R-E-S. It's A-K-E-R-S. Akers. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, like an A-K, right? A-K-E-R-S of Strength. Akers of Strength. Rob Akers, thank you very much for being on the Hammercast.
Thank you for having me, man.
It's been a pleasure. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.